Hey everyone, I'm Danielle Byington, and in this video, I'll be talking about Iphigenia in Aulis by Euripides. In particular, I'm not going to spend a terribly long time talking about the general plot summary of this play because I am actually focusing on an adaptation by Ellen McLaughlin, in which I'm going to be looking at more of the significance of human sacrifice, of the sacrifice being a young woman, and that connection to what's called the dead girl trope. So, to lightly kind of touch on some of the play's background, if you see my other video on the Trojan women, I have some background information on Greek drama there, which is way more concise. Here, I'm going to kind of skip over that and just talk about this play in particular. Um, This play by Euripides, we believe, is written near the end of his life, maybe in the last couple years of his life. And um, along with that timeline, there is some scholarship that debates if the ending is actually written by Euripides or not. Um, so that if that interests you, you can certainly find more articles and resources on that. This play is also a part of a trilogy, the same way that in my other video where I talk about the Trojan women being part of a trilogy, it's written earlier, so it's a different trilogy. In this one, another play that might interest you is the Bacchae. Now, that's the Roman word for Maenads, and those are the worshippers of Dionysus, the god of wine and theater and revelry. So that kind of frenzy and madness that's depicted in that play among all the women characters, that could be interesting to compare to what's happening here in Iphigenia of Aulis, because there is a sort of madness in her decision, like not the typical kind of frenzy or hysteria you might see that's often depicted in women characters in older material, such as this. I'm going to move on because performance context, I think you kind of get that if you see my other video talking about the background of Greek drama. Now, this play, this character, we have characters who come up again in any of what's called the Trojan cycle material. The Trojan cycle is anything where we're getting some branches of information and the tree that talks about the happenings of the city of Troy, specifically the Trojan War. So what's happening in this play comes before the Trojan War happens. But the other thing we've had happen so far is the Judgment of Paris. I have a video covering the Judgment of Paris for you as well. Now, here, by this point, Paris has taken Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. First, she was Helen of Sparta. Now she's about to become Helen of Troy because he takes her and brings her back to the city of Troy, where he is a prince. So he's often described as being remarkably good looking, but also remarkably stupid. And this being a great example because it's what triggers the Trojan War. So Helen of Troy was married to someone else before this. So she's married to Menelaus, who is a king in the country of, what will be Greece as we recognize it on a map today. This time we have lots of tribes. So, for example, we have King Agamemnon. I can't say that word because I'm recording on video in this particular play, and that's a brother to Menelaus, who is married to Helen of Sparta, who becomes Helen of Troy. So Menelaus is the king of Sparta. Okay, so Menelaus's wife, Helen, has been kidnapped. So he goes to his brother and many other leaders in Greece, telling them to bring their cities, their best men from their cities, their armies, their villages, whatever, wherever it is, whoever it is. And we're all going to team up and be the 1,000 ships. You know, like when they say Helen is the face that launched 1,000 ships. They like these are the 1,000 ships that are sailing from Greece to Troy to initiate the Trojan War in attempts to get Helen. And our brother to Menelaus here, Agamemnon. So that's the father of Iphigenia. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go here to this slide with the traditional version. In the traditional version of this play, which McLaughlin's adaptation that I'm concentrating on here does not follow because it's practicing artistic liberties. It's important to see what the look at the skeleton of the plot of the traditional version so you can kind of understand better what Iphigenia is talking about and what Clytemnestra is talking about as well. So the this whole thing of getting the ships going, the 1,000 ships that need to sail from Greece to Troy, well, they can't because there's no wind to sail the ships. They don't have these giant cruise ships to go and for them on toward Troy. So they are relying on wind and it's not working out. And there's a reason for that. Iphigenia's father, Agamemnon, has apparently shot and killed a deer in the sacred forest. And it's a sacred forest because of the goddess of Artemis. And she's a goddess of a few different things. So things like virginity, marriage, the hearth, a little bit of like the domestic in a way. But because he killed this deer in a place he wasn't supposed to. He was poaching. Um, Artemis is going to punish him by saying, well, I'm not going to let you go to Troy unless you sacrifice your daughter Iphigenia to me. That seems like pretty radical shift from killing a deer to having to make a human sacrifice. But he broke a rule in the sacred forest and things that are sacred places. And in ancient mythology, well, it's just like you should have known better. So he, at first, he's kind of thinking about it, but then he decides, no, this is immoral. This would not be okay to do. Um, But when he talks to his brother Menelaus about it, and please remember this about Menelaus later on, if you're reading other things that have to do with the Trojan cycle in general. But Menelaus is like, no, just kill her. We really have to do this. This isn't just about me or you. This is about like saving the face of the Greeks and all of our heritage. This is larger than just getting Helen back. So he's now convinced, and he writes a letter to his wife, Clytemnestra, who is Iphigenia's mother, asking her to send Iphigenia because she's been asked to become the wife of Achilles. You've probably heard his name. And that's a lie. But the mother comes and she has her very young son with her. He brings Iphigenia. Now, at some point, they realize the truth, and somehow, almost all along, Iphigenia was like been on to what is actually going on pretty early once she arrives there. But she, oddly enough, just wants to be a willing sacrifice. She wants to help the Greeks. So keep in mind that like her single death, her willingness to do it as well, to become a sacrifice, it is a this one little action that sets forth the sailing of those thousand ships. So when you hear that expression, the face that launched 1,000 ships, well, actually, it's kind of Iphigenia who launched those 1,000 ships with her death. But it's something we're only in this world, but perhaps not because people believe in such bizarre things even now, that if they do this and take this action and that action, then somehow it's part of a larger scheme of things, and they'll have some importance to create some significance for something that won't even matter in a few hundred years. But I mean, here we're just talking about it. It didn't really do anything to um, make us think that people like Agamemnon and such were good people or helpful people. But in looking at just McLaughlin's version of this, now she has this really, really short version of Iphigenia of Aulis, but it's a part of like a larger kind of scheme of the whole theme. Her whole larger scheme is Iphigenia and Other Daughters. And that goes on to talk about like the myth of Electra. What you might even think about the myth of Electra beside of the Iphigenia kind of myth, because with Electra, if you've ever heard of the Electra complex, McLaughlin also has the play Oedipus Rex um, in this particular collection. She has two books on Greek plays now, in which Electra and Oedipus is where we get the Freudian terms for the sort of psychoanalytical motivations assigned to people pursuing lovers who have qualities or don't have qualities that are like their parents in one way or another. So, um, focusing on just Iphigenia and her mother on stage is very interesting because of this particular chronology that I focus on when I talk about the dead girl trope. The feminine archetypes, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. So Iphigenia is the mother, excuse me, the maiden, and then Clytemnestra is the mother. So you have a sort of procession that's happening there. In originally Clytemnestra, it's the letter believing that, oh, my daughter is going to be married to the great warrior Achilles. And that would entail, because it's the ancient world, if you're a woman being married off, you've got one job, and that's to pop out kids. And so that entails her moving on, proceeding from maiden to mother. But she's having a sort of fork in the road here. So she is going to end up choosing to become the dead girl. He becomes like that archetype of the dead girl trope, instead of going on to wed and be a wife and a mother, and then, maybe live a long life and become the crown. In doing that, she becomes, that's the dead girl trope anyways, she becomes like a part of these traces of these early stories in humanity that a part of a much larger history. So if you've ever studied European literature with me in another class, I have several of those videos on my channel as well. You know that the city of Troy, it might end there in what is modern day Turkey. They're on like the northwest coast. It might end there when the city of Troy falls, but if you've ever read the Aeneid, then you know Aeneas was the last surviving Trojan. He escaped while Troy was burning down, and he goes on to found a city in Italy, and whose descendants will go on to found Rome. And then, if you've ever studied early British literature with me, you know that the connection there is also that a grandson, it's usually depicted as a grandson of Aeneas, is ends up exiled through like because of a freak accident that results in the death of someone. He ends up exiled, wanders across the continent of Europe, and guess where he ends up? He ends up in what is today England, England and Wales, rather, uh, depending on the version of the myth you're looking at. That's Brutus, and he's kind of the beginning of Arthurian legend. So all those stories about King Arthur and Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table. So poor Iphigenia's dead body goes on to represent all of that sort of existence and of Western culture. So it's not just about dying, but that her death comes with a sort of exchange. Anytime you have human sacrifice, there is some kind of exchange involved. Um, even when you're reading these stories, like things, incidents in the Iliad, Apollo wants a lot of bulls sacrificed at his temple early on, among other things, to convince him to lift the plague he has put on the Greek encampments. I believe that's all in Book One of the Iliad, and that so you have an exchange. You give me this, I'll give you that. That's the bottom line of human sacrifice. Again, I will say it seems like a huge shift to go from, hey, you killed a deer in my forest, to you've got to murder your firstborn daughter. But it was still a sort of exchange meant to happen here. The thing about this sort of imagery that McLaughlin is especially playing on, and go back to this slide one more time, is the way the dialogue that she has on the stage that's going on with only Iphigenia and Clytemnestra, not even really talking to each other, is well, it really puts a sort of liminal space between those archetypes of like the maiden to the mother. And Iphigenia, a lot of her dialogue, the way McLaughlin has adapted it in this case, really conflates um, her death and her what was going to be her alleged marriage to Achilles. At one part near the end, she calls the ancient stone on which she will be murdered for the sacrifice. She calls that ancient stone her husband to me. And so that sort of like synonymous nature of those two is an interesting point, because on uh, bases from the ancient world that would depict this narrative, because the Iphigenia of Aulis story was like really freaking popular. They knew about the city, the fall of the city of Troy, which meant they also knew how the Greeks got there because of the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia. So depictions of her, because I guess because it's willing is another reason it's so popular. Um, the depictions of her willingly going to her sacrifice are often conflated with like these images of maidens going to they're being taken to their wedding. Like they're not just standing there by themselves as the lone figure. There's often another figure like escorting them to where they're going. And it's difficult to discern the difference between like the Iphigenia human sacrifice images, the images of a maiden who may or may not be Iphigenia being taken to, I should say, being taken to her wedding, or one being taken to a funeral. So this is all the significance of the dead girl trope here. And you might also look at how this interacts with the Trojan women. I mean, Iphigenia's death, her sacrifice, initiates everything you're seeing that takes place in the Trojan women. The Trojan women are suffering because of Iphigenia's human sacrifice. Um, think about the family relationships you have in both plays. So the the conversation, even in McLaughlin's short, very short version of Iphigenia of Aulis, between the mother and the daughter. You have a very loving mother-daughter like connection between Hecuba and Andromache and the Trojan women, even though Andromache is technically just her daughter-in-law. Um, a, parent and another parent and child situation. Agamemnon struggling at first with should I sacrifice my daughter Iphigenia for the sake of making the freaking wind blow so the boats can go to Troy? And in the end of the Trojan women, Andromache being forced or having no choice but to give up her infant son, Astyanax, to the messenger from Chaldebius, so he can be thrown from the city walls because the Greeks do not want any male Trojan heirs left. So they both make a choice that ends up with the death of their child, but it's in two very different contexts. Iphigenia was this kind of daughter who is about to be wed. That whole concept of there was this brief moment where it's believed she will marry Achilles, and okay, she's not really going to be sacrificed. You look at that beside Cassandra's behavior in the Trojan women. It's very similar. Cassandra's is very clearly, she is always written as being mad. That's just because that's part of her curse in mythology. Cassandra is very willing to go. She thinks she's gonna like marry Agamemnon because he's chosen her to take her back. That's an interesting point too, that he's gonna take the youngest, who is like his own daughter that he sacrificed to get over there to Troy in the first place. Okay, so that's all I have for you on Iphigenia of Aulis. Just let me know if you have questions, and thank you for watching.